Hi, my name is Guy Felicella, and we're going to talk about trauma, addiction, childhood trauma, and just trauma in general. Pain is something that we all encounter in our lives, and it can be physical, it can be emotional, which can lead to addiction. And addiction exists in every community, but so does trauma. And the main driver of addiction is trauma, but yet not enough goes into treating trauma. Everyone is more focused on the addiction. And we spend all our energy trying to fix the symptom of trauma, which is addiction. And this leaves the door often open to relapse, as unaddressed trauma can trigger substance use. So if we start focusing on treating trauma, the root cause of addiction, we'll have a better chance at helping people achieve their recovery. And in my own life, I was severely impacted by trauma, and it started in my early childhood. I grew up in a small town in Vancouver, and from the outside, things looked pretty good. My parents were both hardworking people. We lived in a nice house, middle class, we had money, but inside there was, a lot of emotional and physical abuse. And it started, as early as I can remember. Probably the first time that I'd encountered it was about 5 to 6 years old. But that's not to say that it wasn't happening before. It was just one of those things that pops into my head where my mom and my dad were fighting, and the violence happened. And for me, it was very hard for me to process as a child. And I started to withdraw. I started to feel very anxious, started suffering from depression and anxiety. My mom drank a lot of alcohol. My dad was very rarely at home, and when he was at home, it was, kind of like how I describe, the weather, just very unpredictable. Some days it was good, but you were always waiting for something to happen. And as a young child, you're developing and not given any of these coping skills. My mom, paid more attention to the alcohol, and my dad was never home. And when he was home, I found myself, if you're a young child and you know where the cracks in the floor are of your house because you're afraid of startling people or making yourself known, then that's not a good childhood. And for me, looking for things to cope. I mean, obviously, I tried other things, which were, baseball and sports, and did really well at that, but still had to come back home. And I really struggled in school. The school I went to, which was a private school, they were allowed to hit you. And so I was hit at school. Our teacher used to hit us in the head with his knuckles if we weren't paying attention. And I was kind of looked at as, many times the teacher called me stupid. I started to believe all this at a very early age. And obviously, for me, my parents blamed me as well because I was acting out in school and there was challenges. I was getting into fights, I was getting into arguments, I wasn't listening to my mom, I wasn't paying attention, and I was all of a sudden the one that had caused all this in the household. I have a brother and a sister that weren't impacted the way I was, but also they went into their rooms when stuff went down in the house. I was more of a visualist, so I watched what went on, and I suffered severely because of it. And by the time I was 12 years old, I started running away from home. And at 12 years old, my mom, before that, there was numerous days on a Friday we'd come home after school and our suitcases were packed and we'd leave and we'd go over to her mother's house and we would stay there for a few days, and then my dad would come over there and we would go back, and then it would happen again and again and again. And I remember one of the last times that we've been in shelters, staying over at different friends' houses, and this never gave me any chance of stability in my life. And Eventually, I just realized that this was not going to stop, and that I could no longer, trust my parents to actually take care of me. So I started running away from home. I started getting involved with breaking the law, using drugs, and then started to develop an addiction, and then kept getting brought back by police. And finally, I was arrested at the age of 14, and I was sentenced to 1 year in jail. And sadly for me, prison was a better place for me to live than it was at home. It was a safer environment for me. But the one thing that I remember is my mom came to the court, and she said that she could no longer take care of me or no longer handle me. And so the court put the province in charge of me. So I was a temporary ward in the court. And hearing those words come out of my mom's mouth was, probably the straw that broke the camel's back, where I started to believe that I was really the person that was causing all of this. And after I was released from jail, the government failed miserably by bouncing me around from group home to group home, school to school. And it's just reliving this trauma of abandonment, and that I was being moved consistently because I was problematic. And eventually, I could no longer handle that, and started diving into heavy drug addiction. And I've always said that drug dealers helped me cope with trauma for years, because the healthcare system wouldn't. And eventually found myself homeless in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which I basically suffered from abuse from society. I was called a piece of garbage, police brutality, being incarcerated for selling drugs, using drugs, having drug paraphernalia, and then looked upon as just a menace to society. And the revolving door of going in and out of jail was really, really impacting me. And I was just, everywhere I went, there was layers and layers of trauma. And it started that now I could no longer, first, I never trusted my family to take care of me, but I couldn't trust society because of the way I was being treated. I couldn't access healthcare services because I was a drug user. People just judged me and looked at me. And it was really the most harmful thing that I'd ever felt in my life, is that I just kept believing all the lies that were told, and I had low self-esteem. I didn't care if I died. And people always asked me that. It's like, said that I was going to die if I kept going this way. And I kept saying, when? Because it didn't faze me, because I just felt like a shell of a person. And addiction really just took over in my life. And I'd been diagnosed and had treatment on 5 osteomyelitis bone infections, which are severe life-threatening infections that can kill you. I had to relearn how to walk because I had one in my back. I survived that. I survived the HIV crisis in the 90s, where 1 in 4 were infected in the downtown east side. I survived the overdose crisis in the 90s. And then in 2012, when fentanyl hit the streets in Vancouver, I'd overdosed 6 times in 9 months. And my last overdose is February 18th, 2013, at the supervised consumption site, where I was brought back to life, where I was nearly out for about 10 minutes. And the nurse that brought me back to life was crying. And to me, it was an emotional moment where I'd realized that I could no longer, the pain to remain the same emotionally was worse than the pain to change. And so I battled to change, and I was either going to die in my addiction, or I was going to die trying to get out. And I just wanted to believe that inside that I was worth something, more than what people were saying. And for whatever reason, it was, the few people that were in my life that really supported it, that said that I was worth something. And shortly after that, I was arrested and I was put in jail, but I was offered in jail an outpatient program which would have trauma counseling. And I didn't know what that would mean. I didn't know what that would look like, but I accepted it. And I went and stayed in a transitional house. And I started going 5 days a week to this program, and started talking to this trauma counselor that really, I credit her for really changing a lot of the things that were going on in my life. And looking back, one of the things that she made me say over and over and over again was that you were never responsible for the abuse that happened in that household or the abuse that happened in society. And to me, that was kind of the moment where, and she said, their problems existed before you were even born. So you're not the problem. And, it took months and months for me to believe it. And, because I just felt so worthless inside for so long. And, I dealt with a huge amount of the core issues. And within 9 months, I was using an opioid agonist therapy for that 9 months of that severe counseling session, which gave me the ability to actually kind of, numb some of the pain. And I battled a lot in my life. I've battled abuse, I've battled, addiction, and I've battled homelessness, and I've battled through poverty, and I've just battled my whole life. But the biggest battle in my life was battling through the trauma. And for me, having that safety net of harm reduction underneath me really gave me the ability to start to believe in myself. And then when, I met my wife, and then we have 3 beautiful children, but when our first child was born, I had this immense fear inside of me that I didn't want to pass anything on that I'd endured to my kids or to our kids. And so, more counseling and more understanding, so that it was such a beautiful moment in my life, because I finally stopped believing the lies that I was told for so long. And I started to feel like, that I was a human being, and that I did matter, and that I had the ability to not only change it, but to make it better. And for me now, with my 3 beautiful children, I'm reliving the childhood that I missed out on. And I have a really blessed life, but unfortunately, a lot of people that need trauma therapy, the ones that need it the most, we can't afford to pay for it because it's so expensive. And that's where I think, as a society and as the healthcare, mental health, trauma, and addiction, homelessness, just everything is this is a public health crisis. These should be all covered under people's healthcare, and not that they pick who you see. You pick who you want to see, because I've been lucky in my life that the counselors that I've gone through were very well versed in trauma therapy and understanding how to solutions, and they just gave me the skills to cope, which weren't available as a child. And so much success of my story is really from the people that worked extremely hard to help me. And so for me, I'm just truly grateful. And I'll share in closing a powerful story of healing that's just started to happen again in my life. And I've never talked to my dad about 4 times in the last 20 years. And my cousin called me, and this was the man that caused a lot of trauma in my life. And my cousin called me and said that, and he's 78 years old, and said that he has COVID. And, you know, I'd worked so hard on addressing the issues of trauma, and, you know, not only found, you know, one of the biggest things in my journey is I just found enough to forgive people, not to forget, but to forgive. Because, you know, you're drinking poison and expecting other people to die. And I mean, for me, it was just one of those things where I just couldn't drink the poison anymore, because I was going to be the one that was going to die. And so I called him. And when I called him, he broke down. And, you know, he started saying that he wasted a lot of time. And he said he was really proud of me, and you know, to me, that was huge. I mean, I'd never heard those words in my life, and it meant a lot to hear them. And so, you know, I've been checking in on him, calling him just to make sure he's okay. And once he gets out of the isolation, that you know, we get a few more years possibly to heal up the rest of the journey together. And to me, that's just where I always say to people, it's that don't give up hope, keep battling, and keep fighting for what you believe in. And just remember, don't believe the lies that people tell you, because they're not true. Just believe in yourself, and believe there are good people out there, because there are. You just got to find them. And I hope my story inspired you to try to reach out. And I think that was the biggest moment in my life, is the reaching out part, where I needed some help to move forward, and I needed somebody to help me understand, because I just didn't. And for a long time, I suffered because of that. So thank you very much for listening, and until next time, thank you.